Air travel is on the verge of a revolution, but the nature of the revolution we're talking about today really depends on who you ask. According to some of aviation's brightest minds, the future of air travel is supersonic or perhaps even hypersonic, chasing the legacy of the Concorde into uncharted skies. Others believe that the future lies on the edge of space, taking advantage of sheer altitude to nearly leave the atmosphere entirely before barreling back to Earth. Still others believe that the future of air travel should be its demise, replaced by high-speed rail, hyperloop, or something else entirely. But if there's one path forward for modern aviation that can offer marked improvements across the board while being perfectly technically feasible today, it is the blended wing body, or BWB aircraft. Alternately known as a hybrid wing body or lifting aerofoil, the blended wing aircraft would be a strange sight if it flew over your home tomorrow, but the advantages that it provides over modern commercial aircraft are simply stunning. So today we're going to take a look at blended wing aircraft, what it is, why it works, what it can offer, and the parallel questions of how it might get into the sky, and who is going to put it there. Today's video is sponsored by Surfshark, the VPN that makes online privacy simple, secure, and unlimited. Surfshark offers powerful features to protect your digital life. With unlimited devices on a single account, your entire household can stay secure. Whether it's blocking ads and malware, encrypting your internet activity, or bypassing geo-restrictions, Surfshark has you covered. Plus, with Surfshark Alert, you'll know immediately if your personal data has been leaked, and their 30-day money-back guarantee means you can try it risk-free. So, take your online security further with extra features like private browsing through Surfshark Search and hassle-free streaming without content restrictions. Ready to secure your digital world? Well, go to surfshark.com/mega for an exclusive deal. 4 extra months for free with your subscription. That's surfshark.com/mega, your gateway to better online privacy. And now back to today's episode. Okay, so let's start with the simplest question of all. What is a blended wing aircraft? And no, it's not the same configuration as, say, America's B-2 Spirit bomber or Germany's World War II-era Horten HO-229. That's a flying wing aircraft. It is a completely different thing. Instead, to get the simplest mental image of this machine that's meant to fly in the sky, we're going to picture something that lives in the water. The ocean's sunfish. We'll pop a picture up on screen, but we know a lot of you just listen to this. So basically, those are those great big fish with the up and down wings, known for sunning themselves on the water's surface as if they're dead and then scaring the daylights out of motorboat owners who don't know what they're looking at. To picture a blended wing aircraft, we'll ask you to mentally make a few adjustments to that sunfish form. Slope its top and bottom fins behind it at an angle, make those fins a good deal longer so they can stretch back behind it, and then picture our dear sunfish friend hurtling through the sky at 30,000 feet. Not a pretty picture, but swap out our flying fish for any of the prominent concept designs for a modern blended wing body aircraft, and you'll very quickly see how we got here. Now, the blended wing body aircraft, or BWB, as we're going to refer to it for the duration of this episode because it's easier, utilizes a wide body rather than the cylindrical long fuselages that you'd see on your average commercial jetliner. Its wings are long and often quite narrow relative to what you'd expect on an aircraft of this sheer bulkiness. The cockpit will be set forward on a stubby nose. The engines will be set somewhere at or towards the very back of the plane, and it may or may not have a tail based on who's designing it and what they'd like it to be able to do. Visually, they aren't quite unaerodynamic. There are certain design elements on these aircraft and in concept art pieces that indicate that they are indeed a thing that flies. But they're not the sort of aircraft where it's visibly intuitive to understand how they fly. So, well, here are the basics for you. The big thing that a BWB aircraft design achieves, aerodynamically speaking, is to substantially reduce what's called the wetted area of the plane. That is the surface area of an aircraft that directly interacts with airflow during flight. So the fuselage, the wings, the engines, and anything else of that sort that sticks out of the aircraft. It's not just the frontal area. After all, airflow skims against, say, the long pencil-like fuselage of a modern commercial jet, as well as peeling past the nose. For standard commercial aircraft, the way that they're built is pretty good at keeping them in the sky, but with the drawback that the wetted area is pretty substantial. And while a blended body aircraft does have a substantial wetted area of its own, it offers a much better trade-off between the amount of wetted area and the amount of internal aircraft that you get for every wetted square meter. Alongside the reductions in wetted area, a BWB aircraft will thus experience reduced drag, flying through the air easier with less of a need to expend fuel. Aircraft with a wider body, even though they look like they're less aerodynamic, actually generate a good deal more lift on its underbelly, meaning that you need less wing, which in turn reduces the wetted area that you're dealing with even further. And although the BWB aircraft design has never been adapted into a commercial jetliner, at least not yet, it is a proven concept. During the Cold War, both the Soviets and the Americans built BWB aircraft to serve as bombers, the Soviet Tupolev Tu-160 and the American Rockwell B-1 Lancer. Both aircraft featured a less egregiously disproportionate body relative to its wings than the designs floating around today, but they were BWB aircraft nonetheless. Also on the list are two other American designs from the Cold War era, the Lockheed SR-71 Blackbird and its companion design, the Lockheed A-12 or YF-12. The US even flies a BWB-style drone in service today, the Northrop Grumman Bat, with a handful of copies known to be in use around the world. BWB-style aircraft prototypes have been around since the 1940s, starting with the propeller-driven McDonnell Douglas XP-67, the Moonbat, during World War II, and the UK's even earlier prototype, the Westland Dreadnought, flown exactly one time all the way back in 1924. Airbus has a technology demonstrator called the Maverick based on a BWB design, while America's latest flying prototype, the one that looks most like a design that could feasibly turn into a passenger aircraft, was retired in 2017 after a battery of flight tests that saw it labeled, quote, a huge success. It was dubbed the X-48 and built by Boeing on behalf of NASA. Alright, so that's the brief history of the BWB aircraft design, but just as important is asking why this design has been drawn on so many times before. And the key answers come in two areas: payload and efficiency. Because of its aerodynamic advantages, increasing lift while reducing drag, a BWB-style plane can carry far more inside its bulky fuselage than the average standard-looking aircraft of today. Basically, you get a lot more airplane to work with in exchange for less wetted area, something that would become paradoxical if we were talking about your typical passenger plane, but becomes much more straightforward once we adopt a substantially wider fuselage. Meanwhile, less drag on the aircraft means that there's substantially less power required at any given moment to keep it airborne despite its heavier payload. According to the US Air Force, currently engaged in BWB work for reasons that we're just about to discuss, a BWB aircraft increases aerodynamic efficiency by, quote, at least 30% over the bulky standard design aircraft that the Air Force is considering replacing. BWBs are also a good bit quieter, according to a range of findings from various prototypes and operational models. No matter what you're looking to fly, be it military equipment, freight, or people, the combination of more inside room, better fuel efficiency, and a quieter aircraft is good for everybody, so it should be no surprise that around the world, efforts to design such an aircraft are underway. Now, the first BWB jet proposal worth discussing comes to us from the same place as so many innovative aircraft over the years: the United States military, particularly, in this case, the Air Force. The USAF has been partnered with a Long Beach, California-based startup aviation company called Jet Zero since August 2023. Jet Zero is well on its way to building a prototype BWB aircraft for the Air Force, a technology demonstrator that seizes on the early progress of that NASA prototype that we mentioned before, the X-48, and seeks to bring its capabilities to a new level. As of now, in early 2025, the plan is to assemble and begin flight testing on a prototype aircraft by or before the year 2027. The upcoming prototype won't be built by Jet Zero, but by a far more established and trusted name in the aerospace defense world, Northrop Grumman. The Defense Corporation's Scaled Composites division will build the aircraft with the hope of successfully upscaling the flight control findings that Jet Zero has already generated. The full-size aircraft is already in the process of having its parts manufactured, with assembly expected to be completed during 2026, heading for an estimated first flight in September of 2027. As for what the USAF wants with this new aircraft, well, that's not entirely clear yet, but the Air Force has been in the market for a new air-to-air refueling jet, something that a blended wing design would be absolutely optimal for. They're also in the process of replacing their main tactical strategic airlifters, the C-5 Galaxy, the C-17 Globemaster, and the C-130J Super Hercules. A BWB-style aircraft could offer myriad advantages over any of those aircraft while bringing its improved efficiency to a group of aircraft that, when combined with the US Air Force's tankers and bombers, make up a full 60% of the branch's total fuel burn. And we bring up bombers there because while the upcoming B-21 Raider is a flying wing aircraft, the USAF already has a blended body bomber in service and could very well call on the design again in the future, particularly because the blended wing profile could, under the right circumstances, lend itself to a stealthy design. And speaking of stealth, the next stop on our tour of BWB aircraft in development will have us visit an aircraft built precisely for that purpose. This one comes courtesy of Aurora Flight Sciences, a subsidiary of the Boeing company doing work for another branch of the American federal government, DARPA, or the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. Aurora is working under an initiative called the Sprint Program, intended to provide a logistics aircraft that can perform tactical airlift and personnel recovery missions in areas without suitable runways. Aurora's in the process of developing an X-plane that combined a BWB design with something called a fan-in-wing concept, an aircraft with lift fans embedded in its wings that would allow for vertical takeoff and landing. In addition, the Aurora project is intended to be stealthy in design, optimizing it for roles like covert infiltration and exfiltration on a scale currently not possible for an aircraft of that size. Aurora is working on a technology demonstrator now, anticipated to have a 45-foot wingspan, a 1,000-pound payload capacity, and a top speed of 517 miles per hour. Its finished product, however, has already been mapped out, with a 130-foot wingspan, a 40-foot payload bay, and a total of 4 lift fans capable of flying stealthily at high speeds while achieving runway independence. That Aurora aircraft is slated to begin flight testing as soon as 2027, but not all of these blended wing aircraft designs are intended for military purposes. Instead, we'll circle back to Jet Zero and explore the organization's design for a civilian jetliner. The company is working with Siemens on its passenger aircraft and has released major updates as recently as January 2025, with the stated goal of taking flight as soon as a mere 5 years from now. The blended wing aircraft would purportedly improve fuel efficiency by a staggering 50% with a shorter, wider fuselage capable of holding 250 passengers. The aircraft is expected to be able to fly at ranges of 5,750 miles or over 9,000 kilometers and will be built to run on sustainable fuels with the intent of eventually pivoting the aircraft completely to zero-emissions hydrogen fuel. Designs for the aircraft's interior show rows of seats at least 10 wide, split into several columns down the fuselage, enjoying views from long, continuous windows and from numerous skylights shining natural light into the seats nestled toward the fuselage center. The cabin is designed to be strong and resilient while also weight-saving, with structurally reinforced elements that allow for the addition of skylights without creating any inherent risk of failure. A 1/8 scale model aircraft, dubbed the Pathfinder, was granted clearance to fly in 2024 and began flight testing not long after. Nor is Jet Zero the only company working to create a blended wing jetliner. The San Diego-based company, Nautilus, has recently gotten in on the game, introducing an aircraft called the Horizon in 2024. The Horizon is a wider, stumpier design than Jet Zero's, and it's intended to offer meaningful improvements on leading jetliner aircraft with a 200-seat estimated carrying capacity and the ability to use 30% less fuel than a Boeing 737 or an Airbus A320. The Horizon isn't the first design by Nautilus to leverage a blended wing design. Instead, it's hard at work on the Kona, a pilotless cargo aircraft that uses the same basic design principles. Nautilus purportedly has a full 400 orders for the Kona, which has, by the way, already flown a prototype. The Kona is meant to be powered by twin turboprops with a payload capacity of 3.8 metric tons or 8,400 pounds and a range of 1,050 miles or 1,700 kilometers. Building from the Kona, Nautilus intends to introduce 2 much larger blended wing cargo aircraft, each of them drone designs as well. One of them, the Alicio, will carry up to 60 metric tons or 130,000 pounds of cargo over 4,765 miles or about 7,700 kilometers, while the other, an even larger version called the Nordies, will carry 100 metric tons or 220,000 pounds for distances of up to 6,200 miles or 10,000 kilometers. Around the world, there are a handful of other blended wing designs out there, although they've been met with varying levels of success so far. The Maverick demonstrator that we talked about earlier by Airbus hasn't been publicly updated or expanded over the last few years, although Airbus could conceivably have something going on behind the scenes. An older Russian blended wing design, the Tupolev Tu-404, was the largest passenger aircraft ever designed, with a carrying capacity of 1,214 passengers for a range of 5,700 miles or 9,200 kilometers, but there's never been a serious attempt to build it, and there's not been a follow-up since the conclusion of the Cold War, so we won't expect that. China is the nation currently making the most progress towards a BWB aircraft outside of the US, with news emerging in early 2023 that the nation's Northwestern Polytechnical University has flown a scale model of a roughly 300-seat blended-wing airliner. Meanwhile, recent footage of what's believed to be its flying wing H-20 stealth bomber indicates that even if China hasn't invested further into blended-wing aircraft, its technical prowess is such that a BWB design could probably be realized by the Chinese military. The fact that a growing number of blended-wing aircraft designs are circulating through the public domain right now, it's not a coincidence. In principle, the design's catching on, and in practice, early attempts to model and simulate a full-scale aircraft have clearly offered positive enough results that the designs are worthy of further investment. But rather than simply conclude with a starry-eyed proclamation on the future of air travel, we've got to ask a deeper question. Will all this early enthusiasm result in a genuine industry-wide shift toward a new style of aircraft for the first time in a generation, or is it all just industry hype run amok, making bold promises the modern aviation won't actually be able to keep? Certainly, there are drawbacks to the blended wing design that should give anybody pause. Some of these drawbacks are aerodynamic. These aircraft can be hard to control, especially at low speed, and they're more challenging to safely recover from stalls and other unexpected issues than standard long fuselage aircraft. Other concerns are economic. These are aircraft that make a lot of sense for long-distance flights, but not nearly so much sense when they're tasked with short-haul operations, while they're more difficult to adapt into form-fitting variants than the aircraft of today. There are also practical concerns to account for, from the potential difficulty of evacuating passengers from theater-style seating in an emergency situation to the potential redesigns that would be required of airport terminals and runways in order to support the physical form of these aircraft. But perhaps the biggest concern of all is the one that hangs over the entire aviation industry: resistance to change. If aviation is lucky, it might get one large-scale adaptation of a new sort of airframe every generation. Look back at elderly retired jet fighters like, say, America's F-104 next to the modern F-35, and there's certainly a lot of differences, but the basic form of the aircraft is the same. Put a DC-8 jetliner of the late 1950s next to most modern Boeing or Airbus planes today, and the design basics are pretty much all the same. Every so often, a new aircraft design will catch on in a limited capacity, like the flying wing specifically for stealth bombers, or the early supersonic Concorde and Tu-144 jetliners. But even those, they're practically novelties. The thing about the modern pencil fuselage and wing design of today's commercial jets is that their design is proven to be reliable. We've already built all the infrastructure, and we've developed a wide range of aircraft that aren't anything crazy, aren't anything particularly cool, but are good enough to get the job done and mass-produced enough to be affordable at large scale. Commercial aviation is a risk-averse space, and every new update that suffers a crash, every new design that doesn't catch on, makes both passengers and airliners more risk-averse than they already were. It's not just a practical obstacle, it's a human one, and those are often the most difficult of all to overcome. That said, there are reasons to believe that the transition to blended-wing aircraft will be different. For starters, many of those concerns have already been addressed. Their aerodynamic issues are far more easily controlled with modern fly-by-wire technology. Airport terminals can be updated, and it's not like we've got to stop using traditional aircraft as needed in areas where a blended-wing aircraft isn't the right tool for the job. And not only that, but there's reason to believe that the momentum behind these designs is different. Take, for example, the hundreds of production orders that Nautilus already claims to have, or the fact that the US defense industry will be throwing its full weight behind multiple blended-wing designs, not just one, if it moves forward with its Jet Zero and Aurora initiatives. That sort of military-industrial might just isn't falling in behind most of the innovative new aircraft profiles out there, including most of the supersonic ones, but it's falling in line behind blended wing designs that can be adapted into civilian aircraft with relative ease. And just as important, there are major economic incentives to support any aircraft design that can offer the sorts of 20, 30, or even 50% emission reduction that blended wing designs can provide. The airline industry is rapidly adjusting for a world in which lowered emissions are an international priority that they must have answers for, and a hypothetical switch to blended wing aircraft might be the best answer currently in circulation. As for the question of when, well, our answer may be that these aircraft will be flying sooner than we think. The majority of known blended wing initiatives around the world expect to have full-scale, flyable prototypes by or before the year 2030, and potentially within 3 years from the time we're publishing this episode. Assuming a relatively slow turnaround time between prototype and production, just to be safe, it's entirely fair to project an estimated time of introduction for these aircraft to be anywhere from the mid-2030s to the year 2040, to say nothing of the potential for an even quicker introduction for the military designs, depending on how quickly the US wants to start leveraging these capabilities. It is impossible to say definitively, at least right now, that BWB aircraft are the way of the future. There are no guarantees that this innovative process will work out for the best or will generate the sorts of favorable results that blended wing advocates hope they will. But with any bold design of this kind, it's important to take a very close look at the real-world incentives to move forward versus the ones to abandon a design and move on. In this case, even though there are no foregone conclusions here, the early indicators are that the blended wing aircraft may catch on in a way that commercial air travel hasn't seen in this century. Thank you for watching.